There's a quiet moment when you realize family love doesn't feel like love anymore. It feels like pressure, like expectation, like a bill you never agreed to pay. My name is Avery Daniels. I live in Phoenix, built my career in marketing from the ground up, and worked hard for my independence. But lately, my parents have been urging me to buy a big house, big enough for them to move in. If you've ever had to choose between peace and obligation, stay with me. At first, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like concern. My parents started calling more often than usual, asking gentle questions about my job. How's the promotion going? Are they paying you what you deserve? Have you started saving more aggressively? The conversation sounded supportive, proud even. I told myself this was what loving parents did. They checked in, they stayed involved. But the questions became more specific. How much are you putting away each month? Have you thought about investing in property? You know, real estate is the smartest move at your age. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern I didn't notice until it was already wrapped around me. Then one evening, my mom mentioned it casually. Too casually. You should think about buying a bigger place, she said. Her voice light, almost playful. Something with a garden, a few extra rooms. Your father and I aren't getting any younger. I laughed at first. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Dad joined in without hesitation. He said it would be family-minded, practical, smart. We could all save money by living together. And since I was doing so well, I could handle the expenses. The word handle stayed with me. Not share, not discuss, not plan together. Handle. I asked what would happen to their current home. It was a modest but fully paid house they'd lived in for decades. Mom smiled like she'd been waiting for that question. Your brother will take it, she said easily. He'll need the space once he gets married. Just like that. Their house would go to Daniel. The new house would be mine to pay for. And somehow, this was being framed as unity. I remember nodding slowly, pretending to consider it. Inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet click of realization. This wasn't a spontaneous idea. It had weight. It had structure. It had been discussed. 2 weeks before Dad's birthday, the pressure sharpened. Mom began sending me links to houses. Large ones, 5 bedrooms, wide driveways, fresh paint, and open kitchens staged with bowls of artificial fruit. Each message came wrapped in sweetness. Isn't this neighborhood wonderful? Imagine family gatherings here. This one just feels right. I would open the links during lunch breaks at work, staring at price tags that made my stomach tighten. These weren't starter homes. They weren't even reasonable upgrades. They were statements. And every time I hesitated to respond, another message followed. One night, she sent a listing and added, "Sweetheart, this could be such a meaningful gift for your father." A gift. The word felt heavy. A house as a birthday present. Not symbolic, not shared. Entirely funded by me. A few minutes later, Dad called. His voice was warm, affectionate, steady. He said he didn't want a party this year. No fancy dinner. No wrapped boxes. I don't need anything, he said. Just a home for all of us. He said it like it was simple, like I was the missing piece in a puzzle they had already completed. I smiled into the phone and told him I'd think about it. My voice sounded calm, but my mind was racing through numbers, mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance costs. I pictured myself coming home from work to a house that didn't feel like mine, carrying responsibilities that had never been offered as a choice. That weekend I visited in person. Mom had photos ready before I even sat down. She tapped the screen with excitement, zooming in on spacious living rooms and guest suites. "Look at this one, Avery. It's big enough for everyone. You could host holidays." "You could." Dad nodded, adding that he'd help around the house. He'd mow the lawn, fix things, keep it in order. He sounded almost proud of the arrangement, like we were already living it. They spoke about closeness, about legacy, about how families used to live together and take care of one another, how lonely modern life had become, how lucky I was to have parents who wanted to stay connected. Every sentence was wrapped in warmth, but underneath it there was an assumption, a current pulling in one direction, mine. During dinner, Mom brought it up again, gently, strategically. "Your father's birthday is coming," she said, smiling over her plate. "Wouldn't it be wonderful to surprise him with something lasting?" Dad added that a house meant a home, that all he wanted was for us to be together. It sounded poetic, noble, but I noticed something else. No one asked what I wanted. A few days later, we had a family video call. Daniel appeared on screen from Tucson with his fiancée Emma. He grinned at me like we were sharing an inside joke. "Come on, Avery," he said. "You're the one doing great now. Don't let Mom and Dad stay stuck in that old place." Emma laughed softly, agreeing that it would be so nice to see them somewhere fresh. Dad explained how convenient it would be, how much time and money we'd save, how there'd be space for Daniel and Emma to visit whenever they wanted. Mom chimed in with reassurance. "You won't be alone anymore. I'll help you. You won't have to handle everything yourself." Again that word, handle. I nodded, smiling faintly at the screen, while my thoughts ran in quiet circles. Every version of the future they described had the same structure. I would buy, they would move in. Daniel would inherit their old house. Everyone would benefit. Everyone except the person signing the mortgage. That night the messages kept coming. "Have you thought about the listings? Family always comes first. We should move quickly before someone else buys it." The word we echoed again. We should move quickly. We should act. We should decide. But it wasn't we. It was me. Their voices blended into something almost hypnotic, affection layered over expectation, pride laced with pressure. If I resisted, I wasn't just declining a financial commitment. I was rejecting unity, disappointing my father, failing some invisible test of devotion. That's what made it so effective. It didn't feel like a demand, it felt like love. Love that gently nudged. Love that praised my success while quietly assigning it a purpose. Love that reminded me of everything they'd done for me without ever saying the words outright. And the more they smiled, the more I felt something tighten inside my chest. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't about a house. It was about control disguised as closeness. And I was starting to understand that saying yes wouldn't just change my address. It would change my life. A week later, I told myself I was overthinking everything. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that usually made their house feel inviting. I stopped by with a cake in my hands and something like hope in my chest. Dad's birthday was only days away, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could talk about it calmly. No pressure, no grand plans, just a simple celebration. The front door was unlocked. It usually was. I stepped inside and called out softly, "Mom, Dad, I brought something sweet." No answer. The house felt strangely still. No television, no music from the kitchen. Just voices drifting from the living room, low, focused, private. I hesitated in the hallway, shifting the cake box in my hands. I was about to announce myself again when I recognized the tone. It was Dad's voice, clear, confident. "Once Avery signs the contract, we'll move in right away." The words landed before I had time to process them. "Once Avery signs," my breath caught sharp and sudden, like I'd walked into something invisible. For a split second, I wondered if I'd misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about something else. A lease, a form, anything but that. Then Mom spoke. "What about this house?" she asked, quieter but not uncertain. Dad didn't pause. "Give it to Daniel. He's starting a family. He needs it more." The hallway seemed to shrink around me. I stood completely still, the cake box trembling just slightly in my hands. Through the reflection in the glass cabinet near the entryway, I could see part of the living room. Dad leaning forward toward the laptop screen, Daniel's face glowing from wherever he was calling in. Emma beside him, smiling. "That would be perfect," Daniel said easily. "Emma's already talking about fixing up the backyard." They laughed. Not nervously, not hypothetically. They weren't discussing possibilities. They were discussing logistics. The plan was finished. The timeline was decided. The house I hadn't agreed to buy had already been mentally furnished. Their move-in date had already been imagined. And their current home, my childhood home, had already been reassigned. All of it hinged on one thing: my signature. I felt something inside me go very quiet. The cake suddenly felt absurd in my hands. Sweet frosting, decorative piping, a celebration for a man who had just spoken about my future like it was a resource to allocate. Mom stepped into the hallway carrying a laundry basket, and that's when she saw me. "Avery," she said, startled. Her eyes flicked from the cake to my face, then past me toward the living room. I couldn't tell if she knew how much I had heard. "Oh, you're here early," she added, her voice lifting into something forced and light. Behind her, Dad continued speaking, unaware. "We'll tell her it's for family unity. She'll agree if we say it's what's best for everyone." My stomach dropped. Mom winced and turned toward the living room. "John," she called softly. "She's here." The voices stopped. Not faded, stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the conversation itself. Dad appeared in the hallway a second later. For a brief moment, his expression was stiff, caught off guard. Then it rearranged itself into something softer, something paternal. "Avery, sweetheart," he said casually, "you should have told us you were coming." As if the problem were timing. His eyes landed on the cake and he smiled. "What's this?" I opened my mouth, but the words felt distant from me. I could still hear his earlier certainty echoing in my head. "Once she signs, give it to Daniel. He needs it more." "I just thought I'd drop this off," I said finally. My voice sounded flat, mechanical, like it belonged to someone else. He reached to take the cake, but I didn't let go immediately. For a strange second, we both held the box between us. Sweetness on the outside, bitterness underneath. "Thank you," he said gently, tugging it free. Mom hovered beside him, her smile too wide, too careful. "You'll stay for coffee, won't you?" she asked. The invitation felt rehearsed, like part of the script they had already written. I looked from one to the other. I searched their faces for hesitation, for guilt, for some sign that I had misunderstood. But all I saw was calculation wrapped in affection. "No," I said quietly. "I should go." Dad didn't argue. That might have been the loudest answer of all. I turned toward the door, my steps steady even though my hands were still trembling. The house looked the same as it always had. The framed photos on the wall, the faint scent of something cooking, the ordinary comfort of it all. But it no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage. Outside, the sunlight hit me harder than I expected. The air was warm, almost heavy. I walked to my car and placed the cake carefully on the passenger seat. For a moment, I just stood there staring at it. A birthday gift, that's what they had called the house. But it wasn't a gift. It was a transaction. I would buy the future. They would divide the benefits. Daniel would receive the reward. And my role was to smile and sign. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door. The quiet inside the car felt different from the silence in the house. This one belonged to me. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and that's when the tremor finally reached my arms. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a small shaking I couldn't control. I replayed every conversation from the past few weeks. The cheerful links, the emotional speeches about legacy, the subtle reminders that family comes first. The way Daniel had laughed on the video call. It had all been coordinated, not cruel in tone, but strategic in intent. The most painful part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the assumption that I would say yes. It was the certainty. They were so sure I would comply that they never imagined I might overhear them before I agreed. I started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught one last glimpse of the house in my rearview mirror. It looked peaceful, unchanged, as if nothing inside it had shifted. But something inside me had. As I drove, another memory surfaced, unexpected and strangely clear. My former coworker Diane. Months ago, I had stayed late at work to fix someone else's mistake. I remember venting to her in the break room, laughing it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. That helping was just what I did. She had looked at me steadily and said, "Love can't be built on guilt." At the time, I thought she was talking about office boundaries, about saying no to extra tasks. Now, sitting in my car with frosting scent lingering in the air, I understood what she really meant. Guilt had always been the currency in my family. Not open demands, not threats, just quiet expectations, emotional leverage. The suggestion that, if I didn't give, I was withholding love. And I had been paying in full. I drove until their neighborhood disappeared behind me. The city stretched ahead, familiar and bright, but I felt like I was seeing it differently for the first time. The cake sat untouched beside me, a symbol of celebration for a man who had already planned how to spend my future. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept driving, letting the truth settle into place. This wasn't about a house anymore. It was about the moment I realized that what they called unity felt a lot like control. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I was willing to sign my name to that. The next morning, I woke up knowing something had ended. Not with a fight, not with slammed doors or accusations, just ended. Sunlight slipped through the curtains like any other day, but it felt unfamiliar, almost intrusive. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I'd heard in that hallway. Once she signs, give it to Daniel. She'll agree. My phone buzzed before noon. "Mom, we're worried about you. Come by for dinner." I let it ring. A few minutes later, another message appeared. "Don't be upset. You misunderstood what we meant." Misunderstood, as if I hadn't heard the certainty in Dad's voice. As if context could soften a completed plan. Dad called 3 times that day. I watched his name light up my screen, the smiling photo beside it unchanged. My thumb hovered over the answer button once. Just once. Then I turned the phone face down. For the first time in my life, I chose silence, not the kind that simmers with resentment, not the dramatic kind meant to punish, just absence. I didn't block them. I didn't send a long message explaining how hurt I felt. I simply stopped responding. And in that quiet, something strange happened. The world didn't collapse. By evening, though, the silence inside my apartment felt too loud. My thoughts kept circling back, replaying the same questions. Was I overreacting? Was I being ungrateful? Was I cruel for even considering pulling away? I called Renee. We'd been friends since college, the kind of friend who had seen me through bad breakups, career changes, and the slow, stubborn climb into adulthood. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, the kind with mismatched chairs and the steady hum of an espresso machine. She walked in with her usual energy, wrapped me in a hug, and said, "Okay, tell me everything." So I did. The cake, the hallway, the plan, the certainty in their voices. I spoke without stopping, like if I paused even once, I might start crying instead. Renee didn't interrupt. She just listened, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. When I finally ran out of words, she leaned forward. "You have every right to be angry," she said softly. Angry. The word felt sharp and accurate. "But don't let that anger decide what you do next," she continued. "If you react with fury, you'll just be playing the role they expect. You'll give them something to argue against." I stared at her. "So what do I do?" "Pretend it's fine," she shook her head. "No, you draw the line." The phrase settled between us. "You teach them where you end and they begin," she said. "Not by yelling, not by proving anything, just by deciding what's yours." That night, her words echoed in my apartment. Draw the line. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to humiliate them. I didn't want to win. I just didn't want to be maneuvered into a life I hadn't chosen. The next morning, I called Mr. Lewis. He'd handled a contract dispute for me years ago. Calm, methodical, impossible to rattle. When I walked into his office, the faint scent of paper and lemon polish hit me, grounding in its simplicity. "Avery," he said, with a polite nod. "What can I help you with?" I sat down and chose my words carefully. "If I buy a house under my name," I asked, "is there any legal way my parents or anyone could claim ownership later?" He raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. Instead, he opened a folder and began explaining property law in steady, clear terms. If I purchased independently, if there were no co-signers, no shared financial contributions, no implied agreements, then no one could demand a share. Not parents, not siblings. Family didn't override ownership. As he spoke, I felt something loosen inside me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vindication. It was clarity. "This isn't about a specific house," I said quietly. "I just need to know what's mine." He gave a faint, almost approving smile. "That's the best reason to ask." When I stepped back into the sunlight outside his office, the air felt different. Not lighter, just steadier. For years, I had equated generosity with goodness. I thought being the dependable one, the accommodating one, made me loving. But no one had ever taught me that boundaries were a form of love too. Not just for others, for myself. That evening, I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand. My parents had sent 3 more messages that day. Concerned, insistent, carefully worded. I didn't feel rage when I read them. I felt distance. I opened a new message and typed slowly. "I need some time to think. please don't contact me. No explanation, no defense, no apology. My thumb hovered for a second, the old instinct to soften it rising in my chest. Add a heart emoji, add reassurance, add something to make it easier for them. I didn't. I pressed send. Then I placed the phone face down on the table and sat back. The apartment was quiet. For the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt chosen. Dad's birthday dinner arrived, wrapped in candlelight and the smell of roasted chicken. The house looked exactly the way it always had, when guests were coming over bright, polished, almost theatrical in its warmth. The dining table was dressed in a white cloth that Mom only used for special occasions. Candles flickered between plates, casting soft light across familiar faces. I stood at the front door for a long moment before knocking. When Mom opened it, her smile stretched wide, just a fraction too eager. "You made it, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt carefully measured. "We were just talking about you." "Of course you were," I thought. Inside laughter floated from the dining room. Dad beamed when he saw me. "There's my girl," he said, wrapping his arms around me. His embrace felt performative, firm enough to be convincing, brief enough to avoid questions. Daniel appeared. Moments later, Emma close behind him. They looked radiant, relaxed, like people already settled into a future they had no doubt was coming. Daniel grinned. "So," he said, nudging my shoulder lightly, "the big buyer is finally here." His tone was playful, but there was something underneath it, certainty. Emma chimed in gently. "We were just saying how beautiful the new place is going to be. It'll be so nice having everyone together." I smiled. It was astonishing how comfortably they spoke about it. About the house I had never agreed to buy, about rooms that didn't exist, about holidays that had already been assigned to a property still sitting in a stranger's listing online. I took my seat across from them. Mom poured me wine. "You've been so quiet lately," she said sweetly. "We were all saying how thoughtful you are." She gestured toward the neighbor sitting near the end of the table, Mrs. Lang, who had known me since childhood. "Avery has always been so," Giving Mom continued, "always thinking of her family first." Mrs. Lang nodded approvingly. "You're lucky parents," she said. "Most children these days are too busy for family." The compliment slid over me like a thin sheet of ice. Across the table, Daniel and Dad were already discussing details. "We'll move quickly once everything's finalized," Dad said confidently. "The neighborhood Avery's buying in is perfect, close to the park, quiet, safe," Daniel chuckled. "And the old house won't go to waste. Emma already has ideas for a nursery." Emma laughed softly, resting her hand over his. The room filled with the clink of forks against plates, light conversation, easy smiles, and underneath it all a quiet assumption that my silence was agreement, that my absence of protest meant permission. Halfway through dinner, Dad raised his glass. "To family," he declared. Everyone lifted their glasses. I mirrored them, my hand steady, my heart detached. "To family," I echoed. The words sounded different now. Less like belonging, more like obligation. As dessert was served, Mom's cinnamon pie. Dad's favorite, the lights dimmed slightly. Candles glowed warmer. The atmosphere thickened with nostalgia and expectation. Mom leaned down and whispered near my ear, "You've made your father so proud." I looked up at her and smiled faintly. "I'm glad I said." When Dad blew out the candles, applause filled the room. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. Then I stood, the scrape of my chair against the floor, cut through the laughter. "I have something," I said, calmly. The room quieted immediately. Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a satisfied grin. "Of course you do," he said, always the generous one. I held his gaze. "It's a gift," I continued softly, "for all of you." Mom's eyes shimmered with anticipation. Dad sat straighter, pride already blooming across his face. I reached down and picked up a thin brown envelope from beside my chair. It wasn't large, it wasn't dramatic, just a simple folder. But the air shifted the moment it appeared. Dad accepted it with a smile that bordered on triumph. "So, this is it," he said, glancing at Mom. "Our girl finally did it." Emma squeezed Daniel's arm. Mrs. Lang leaned forward, curious. The entire table seemed to hold its breath. Dad opened the envelope carefully, pulling out a stack of documents. He scanned the first page, his expression glowing at first, then flickering. His brows furrowed. "Wait," he murmured. "What is this?" Mom leaned closer. "Isn't that the deed, honey? The house in Willow Creek?" I took a slow breath. "It's a deed," I said evenly. "Yes." Daniel reached over and grabbed one of the pages, his eyes darting across the address. "This isn't Willow Creek," he said slowly. "This isn't even in the same state." "That's right," I replied. The room felt very small. "It's a house I bought last week," I said. "In Vermont." Silence. "In my name only." Dad looked up sharply, confusion hardening into something else. "In your name only," he repeated. "You mean your mother and I." "No co-signers," I said gently. "No shared title. No hidden conditions." Mom's face had gone pale. Daniel's jaw tightened. I folded my hands lightly in front of me. "I thought long and hard about what I owe this family," I continued. "I owe you love." My voice didn't waver. "I don't owe you a mortgage." The words settled over the table like a stone dropped into still water. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Mom covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Avery," she whispered, "we never meant to hurt you." Dad's face flushed red. He slammed the folder shut. "You're misunderstanding everything we've done for you," he snapped. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you. And this is how you repay us." His voice rose sharp and wounded. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "I'm not repaying you," I said. "I'm stepping out of a role I never agreed to play." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "So that's it," he said, disbelief twisting his features. "You get a fancy house for yourself and we're just left behind." Emma reached for his arm, whispering his name, but he pulled away. "You're unbelievable, Avery." Mom sobbed harder, clinging to Dad's sleeve. "She's just angry," she pleaded. "She'll come around." But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I felt calm. The kind of calm that comes after a storm has already passed. "This isn't punishment," I said, softly. "It's peace. I hope someday you understand that." No one answered. The candles flickered their light, trembling against the glassware. Mrs. Lang stared down at her plate, silent now. I picked up my coat. My heels clicked softly against the wooden floor as I walked toward the door. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. No one tried to stop me. At the threshold, I paused, not to look back, but to let the moment settle. The room behind me was frozen in disbelief. The future they had constructed so confidently had dissolved in a single sentence. Outside, the night air was cool and still. I stepped into it and closed the door gently behind me. The world felt quieter out there, honest. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of candlelight. and the silhouettes of the people I loved. Confused, angry, grieving something they believed was theirs. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply refused to sign it away. As I walked to my car, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks, maybe years, lifted from my chest. Not because I had won, but because I had chosen myself. And for the first time, peace felt heavier than guilt, but it also felt right. 6 months later, winter arrived in Vermont without asking permission. Snow layered itself over the roof in soft, deliberate sheets, settling into the eaves and along the stone fence that marked the edge of Avery's property. Mornings came pale and slow. The world outside her windows looked as though it had been gently erased and redrawn in white. The house, her house, creaked differently in the cold, not like her parents' place where every sound had felt like a reminder of expectation. This house sounded alive in a quieter way, the low hum of the furnace, the faint tick of cooling pipes, the shuffle of wind against cedar siding. It felt lived in now. A pair of boots rested by the door, salted at the edges. A wool scarf hung over the back of a kitchen chair. On the wide wooden table, a stack of papers sat beside her laptop work projects she took on remotely, chosen, carefully negotiated without apology. In the corner, a small bookshelf had grown from 3 novels to 12. On the windowsill above the sink, she had placed a chipped ceramic mug that held nothing but a sprig of evergreen she'd clipped from the yard. The rhythm of her days had changed. She woke without the buzz of anxiety that used to pulse beneath her ribs whenever her phone lit up with her mother's name. She made coffee, slowly watching steam curl upward like breath. Sometimes she walked the perimeter of her land before starting work, boots crunching against the crusted snow. The air bit her cheeks, but it felt honest, sharp, not manipulative. Silence here wasn't weaponized. It wasn't a punishment. It was simply space. In the beginning, the quiet had felt foreign. After the birthday dinner, after the envelope and the stunned faces and the words she had spoken with steady hands, "I owe you love, but not a mortgage," the fallout had come in waves. There were messages at first, her mother's voice strained with hurt, her father's tone controlled but edged, Daniel's confusion, then anger, then a brief, brittle attempt at humor that didn't land. "You've embarrassed us. We were trying to build something together. Family doesn't do this to each other." The house in Vermont, hers alone, had been called impulsive, selfish, dramatic. There had been accusations that she had planned this to humiliate them, as though her boundary were an attack rather than a refusal. But what surprised her most was how quickly the narrative shifted. Once it became clear she would not reconsider, once Mr. Lewis's calm explanation of her legal standing translated into practical finality, the tone changed from persuasion to consequence. Her parents could not afford the larger home without her signature. The plan they had quietly constructed, the careful transfer of the inheritance of the current house, to Daniel collapsed under its own arithmetic. Daniel and Emma stayed where they were. Her parents remained in their house, the one she had grown up in, though it no longer felt like a monument to legacy. It felt in her mind like a structure stripped of its invisible scaffolding. She heard updates indirectly. An aunt mentioned that her father had become quieter at gatherings. A cousin said her mother spoke about misunderstandings with a polished smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel had taken on extra shifts at work. Emma had returned to part-time consulting. There was no dramatic downfall, no cinematic unraveling, just reality. Avery had expected to feel vindicated. Instead, she felt something softer. Clarity didn't come with fireworks. It arrived like snow, steady, covering everything evenly until the landscape looked different, though the ground beneath remained the same. One afternoon in late January, she found herself sitting by the window as flurries drifted sideways across the yard. She wrapped her hands around a mug of tea and thought about guilt. Guilt had been the primary currency of her childhood. It had been dressed up as gratitude, as loyalty, as proof of love. If you loved us, you would. If you cared about this family, you wouldn't hesitate. She had mistaken compliance for connection. What she understood now was quieter and far less dramatic love offered with conditions was a contract, not a gift. And she had finally refused to sign. That refusal had cost her something. Holidays passed with short formal texts. There were no more daily calls. Birthdays were acknowledged with polite brevity. The closeness she had once chased, trying to earn it through achievement, through generosity, through financial success, no longer dangled in front of her like a prize. In its place was something steadier. The first time she realized she wasn't angry anymore, it startled her. She had been shoveling the front steps after a heavy snowfall breath, fogging the air when she noticed that her thoughts of her parents no longer came with heat. No rehearsed speeches, no imagined confrontations. Just a simple recognition they had wanted something from her that she could not give without betraying herself, and she had chosen herself. The world did not end. That truth settled into her bones more deeply than any argument ever could. Inside the house, there were small signs of her evolution. A framed photograph of the mountain view she'd taken herself. A handwritten list taped inside a kitchen cabinet, non-negotiables. Beneath it, 3 simple lines. My name on what I pay for. My time is mine. Love without leverage. She didn't look at the list every day. She didn't need to. It had already done its work. Sometimes in the evenings, she lit the fireplace and let the warmth seep slowly into the room. The flames moved without urgency. Outside, snow continued its quiet descent. She would think about that night, the envelope in her hands, the weight of the deed, the shock that rippled across the table. She no longer replayed it to justify herself. She replayed it to remember the feeling of standing upright in her own life. Peace, she had learned, was not loud. It did not demand applause. It did not need witnesses. It required space, and space often looked from the outside like distance. She wondered occasionally whether her parents understood what had happened, not the financial mechanics of it, but the emotional shift. Whether they recognized that the plan had failed not because she was ungrateful, but because she was no longer willing to translate love into obligation. Perhaps they never would. That too was something she had made peace with. On the coldest nights when the sky cleared and the stars sharpened against the dark, she stepped onto the porch and looked out over the quiet stretch of land. The snow reflected moonlight in a way that made everything appear luminous. There was no audience for her choice here, no one measuring her loyalty, no one calculating her usefulness, just the steady beat of her own breath in the cold air. 6 months ago, she had walked out of a dining room into the night, uncertain but resolute. Now she stood in another night, entirely one she had chosen. The cost had been real, so was the peace. And for the first time in her life, the two no longer felt like opposites. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is draw a line and call it love. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're the quiet proof that we value our own peace. Avery found her home, not in approval, but in clarity. Maybe home isn't a place at all, but the space where you can stand without guilt. If this story resonated, share what home means to you and stay with us for more stories like this.